Okay, hi everybody. Welcome back to channel Yasu, which is the most popular live show within Panasonic Group. Today we have a special guest, the guest from actually Switzerland. His name is Omar Toulan. He's a MBA Dean of IMD, which is one of the world best business school. Okay, so welcome, Omar.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
It's a great it's a great honor to have you on this program. First, could you tell me a little bit about IMD?
Yes, as you mentioned, we're located in Switzerland. I'd say we're one of the top business schools in Switzerland, in all of Europe, I would say, particularly focused on leadership. This is something which, as an institution, IMD is a place where we develop not only MBAs but also executives. Probably around 8,000 to 9,000 executives per year. And on top of that, we have a boutique MBA program of 100 students. Again, focused on leadership. Our students tend to be slightly older than the average. But we give them all the basic tools of an MBA, plus, like I say, the leadership element, which I think today is as important as ever.
Yeah, actually, we started the MBA program 3 years ago. The first employee we sent to who were on that program is Shibata-san. He's actually my business manager. He's the first employee who was sent to IMD, actually.
Well,
Do you know him?
You chose very well. Chose very well.
Okay.
He's an extremely great representative for the firm, and now also a great representative as an alumnus of IMD.
And also, Kazuo Ichijo-san, he's a very good friend of mine. He was actually here on this program.
Yes,
yeah.
I saw him a few weeks ago when we were both in Lausanne in Switzerland. And he spoke very highly of the show. He said, "Yes, you must do it. It's a great show to be on." And he spoke very highly of yourself as well as obviously the company.
Okay, glad to hear that. Yeah. And IMD is located in Lausanne. I've never been there, but I heard it's a pretty nice city.
It's very beautiful. It's a small city of around 250,000 on Lake Geneva. We're about half an hour from Geneva itself. Beautiful scenery with the lake, the Alps,
Wow.
and if you think of Switzerland, the stereotype image, that's effectively Lausanne.
Wow.
So
People speak French there?
yes, we're in the French part. But the reality is IMD and much of Switzerland, you can get away with English or without necessarily having to speak
pretty
French.
international.
It's pretty international. I
City.
think about 40% of the city are non-Swiss citizens.
Oh, is that so?
Yeah.
And what made you come to Japan? Why are you here?
Well, here I
Of
love.
course, we invited you to.
I love
here.
Japan. I mean, Japan is a place that's been very dear in my heart for many years. Prior to moving to IMD, I used to be a professor at McGill University.
McGill.
And McGill, based in Montreal in Canada. And for about 25 years, McGill had an MBA program based here in Tokyo. And each year I would come over for 2 weeks to teach in the program, starting in the late 90s up until the roughly 2016. And so
McGill is a very famous name in Tokyo. They have alliance with Sophia University.
So for a number of years, we were leveraging the campus of Sophia University until we ended up setting up our own facility and running the program out of that, which was located in Shinjuku. So it was a great experience to be able to come each year, and moving to Switzerland, I hadn't had the opportunity in recent years to come back to Tokyo. So I was in Singapore for a discovery event with our MBA students last week.
How many students were there?
I took 50, so I took
50.
roughly half of our class to Singapore. The other half of the class was located in Silicon Valley at the same time. And though I know it's not right next door, at least time zone-wise, Tokyo and Singapore are relatively close. And so I decided to come up for a week.
So after that discovery trip, you came to Tokyo.
Exactly.
To meet some people.
So I
and
meet
having fun.
meet some people. Also, like I say, for some personal reasons, just to be able to visit some friends who I haven't seen in a number of years, but also with some meetings with different companies as
Great,
well.
great, great. So when you taught in McGill University in Tokyo, I guess that most of the students are Japanese students. I was wondering there was any difference in terms of teaching Japanese students versus teaching Canadian, US, European students.
The program itself was roughly, I would say, 70-75% Japanese, and the rest were expats living in Tokyo or the surroundings.
You taught in English, right?
It was all in English, yes. Fortunately, we didn't have any professors at the time who spoke Japanese, so English was a requirement for the program. And I think, to be honest, it probably also resulted in somewhat of a selection bias of who chose the program, because it wasn't maybe the typical person in Tokyo, because they needed to be fluent in English. The MBA is quite let's say, an extrovert type of degree, right? It's one where you need to engage, you need to not be shy, to talk out, and so forth. So I wouldn't say there was a huge difference. In general, the pedagogy in Japan compared to the US is slightly different at the undergrad level. So people may not be used as much to having discussions, to challenging the professor. I know in many countries, not just Japan, but in parts of the Middle East, you don't challenge the professor. What they say is sort of law, and you accept it. And that's not the case for an MBA program. You want people to engage and discuss. And so I think also over the course of the program was 2 years, you would see people evolving and becoming more comfortable in doing that.
I see. Yes. Okay, so at the MBA program in MID, I was wondering, there were any area of interest which is different from the past among company leaders?
Yes, I would say if I think about, particularly on the corporate side, when we're running executive programs, what are companies asking for? And I would say currently there are 3 popular trends. I mean, as an institution, IMD is always known for leadership, so that is always our number 1 element. But on top of that, more, let's say, topical areas include AI. People are asking,
absolutely,
not so much for the technical elements, but how do you understand, how do you devise policy regarding AI, and how do you understand the basics of it? Secondly, I'd say is sustainability. Okay, sustainability is an issue which for several years has been on the top of the agenda, and it's staying there. And then also related to AI, I would say is digital transformation, as that would, to some extent, preceded AI and has sort of morphed into AI. And then the last area I would say, particularly in the last year and a half, is geopolitics.
Geopolitical challenges.
How do you manage geopolitics? How do you understand it? How do you develop strategies for geopolitics? That's an area which I've been teaching for probably 20, 25 years. And the first 15 years, nobody really cared. It was an environment where geopolitics was sort of secondary to corporate strategies. And today it's flipped the other way.
Right. One of the kind of very high priority agenda. So in terms of jobs MBA students want to get after the program, is there any change in trend? I understand some students will come back to the original company, but
no, I'd say, particularly, I mean, I've been an academic now for 25 years, and when I started in academia, the largest percentage, probably at least half or 60% of people would want to go to either consulting or finance.
Okay.
Those were the 2 areas which, you went to do an MBA for those reasons. And today it's quite different. Consulting is still quite popular. Finance, less so, I would say. But you have a lot more people interested also in entrepreneurship, in starting new companies, in technology. To give you an example, 2 weeks ago, we had a competition at IMD for what we call a Venture Award. It's an award which one of our alumnus donates of 100,000 francs to one member of the class to help them start a new business. And we had 25% of the class pitched ideas for this award. That wouldn't have been the case 20 years ago.
Wow.
It's funny. When I graduated from my PhD in the 90s, if you said you were starting your own business, it was sort of code word for I didn't get a job. And that's definitely not the case today.
I see.
It's really changed in terms of the approach towards entrepreneurs.
I assume that they have to return the student loan.
Yes.
They would choose a more stable job, which is not startup jobs.
Exactly. And that's why the majority will probably start their businesses in a few years. But the whole reason for this venture award was to help them relieve that stress. So the 100,000 francs was basically a way of having them pay off their loan and be able to start a new business right away. But you're right. If MBAs aren't cheap, and
Right.
so to be able to pay it off, many people feel they have to go back to the corporate world right away.
I must say, our program is very nice. I mean, everything is sponsored by
Exactly.
Panasonic.
No, and that's a great thing. To be honest, there are not so many parts of the world which do that, and it's great when they do. Yes.
As you are aware, probably last 20 years, 30 years or so, generally Japanese companies have been losing its competitiveness. We are losing in the competition in the digital world, internet, software, SaaS services, cloud services. And on the other hand, Asian players are emerging in manufacturing area. So we are kind of stuck in the middle. And it's a big agenda is where we should compete. I think that's similar to European companies. Is that right?
For sure. I think, the reality is the world is very different than it was, when back in the 90s, when I was doing my PhD at MIT, we had a Center for Japanese Studies. There was a lot of connection between MIT and Japan to learn from Japan because of all the advances.
Japan as number one, right?
Exactly. The famous book, Japan Inc. It was really a role model for many, but it was a role model that fit a particular environment, which was sort of big conglomerate, particularly
mass production of hardware.
Exactly, hardware focus, mass production. And there were also a lot of companies in Europe that were actually looking to the Japanese model and going in that direction. Again, whether you think about the big car companies in Europe or the electronics companies or healthcare companies, they face some similar issues. If you look at the largest firms in the world today, they are all tech firms, but primarily on the software side. And if we go back to even 2000, it was a very different profile of companies dominating the world scene. And also 20 years ago, you did not have China on the international markets in terms of their own multinationals. You didn't have Korea to the same extent, and you didn't have India to the same extent. And so there's a lot more global competition. And the challenge there is for firms, how do you adapt to a changing environment? And it's harder for the incumbents to do that.
I see. I understand that some of the European companies, in the face of competition with Japanese companies, they had been trying to shift their business model from manufacturing to more solutions and B2C to B2B. And now we are learning from those companies how to transform ourselves.
It's true, because if one is in the hardware business, the challenge is if one stays only in the hardware and not the systems or the software to support it, one runs the risk of being commoditized. And so it is important to think about how do you provide a customer solution, which will also hopefully, I don't like to use the word lock-in, but where you provide more to the relationship of your customer, such that there are less incentives for them to go somewhere else if they find a solution which is 2% cheaper. So it is important to provide solutions and not just products.
Yeah, I thought the automobile is totally analog things you can differentiate. But with EV, it's finally started to be commoditized.
Yes.
So it's a scary thing.
No, it's true. And like I say, if you look at the car market today, the top 5 players in the world are very different. Obviously, you still have Toyota in there and so forth, but the landscape is so different than it was even 10 years ago.
Yeah, especially in Germany, it's based on automobile industry, economy.
No, it's interesting. I was watching the news this morning, and they were talking about the Euro, the football competition, and how the car sponsor for the Euro is actually BYD, and yet it's taking place in Germany.
Yeah.
And so it's not Volkswagen, it's not Mercedes,
Oh.
it's actually BYD.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Very, very, very scary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
So in that sense, I think our Japanese people should learn more about strategy. So lack of strategy is really hurting us. So I believe more people should learn the school like IMD.
No, completely. I think strategy is as we've discussed in the past. It's not just a business plan. A business plan
that's
is
exactly Kazuo Ichijo sensei.
exactly.
Told me
A
about
colleague
it.
of mine. It's a business plan is an element of strategy. It's an outcome of a strategic process.
Right.
But in order to get to that point, you have to focus on is the strategic thinking element. How do you critically assess a situation? How do you think in terms of systems? How do you think in terms of pattern recognition? It's developing certain critical cognitive skills that allow you to assess a situation and therefore eventually come up with a business plan. But even when you do come up with a business plan, what's important is that you make sure that this is constantly updated. One of my colleagues from McGill was the famous professor Henry Mintzberg, and he came up with the concept of emergent strategy, that you can plan as much as you want, but there's always going to be an element which you have to adapt given changes in the circumstances. And so we need to have a plan, but be agile enough to change it when we need to.
Okay. So in Japan, the situation is like I said, the business portfolio management is getting more and more attention in terms of increasing the market value as well as sharpening the strategy. So is business portfolio management is really core of the strategy, would you say?
It is a fundamental element. I mean, I always say the performance of a company is based on two things. One is how attractive is the business itself, the industry, and secondly, how well can I manage those assets or that business? So what do I bring to the table as well as what does the industry bring? The fact of the matter is you always want to look at your assets and say, am I managing this better than somebody else could? Right? If somebody else could manage it better than me, provide more value to this asset, to some extent, it's better that they run it. There may be situations where for a strategic reason you want to keep the asset in-house, but you want to be able to focus on what you do best and leverage that. And so I think you do see, even in places like Europe, if you look at a company like Novartis had everything from generic drugs to consumer businesses to the core R&D pharmaceuticals, and they've spun off the consumers, they've spun off the generics to be able to focus on what they do extremely well and make the most out of those and grow that business.
So in terms of migrating from just the manufacturing, just a simple assembly of things, to more of a solution, software, SaaS services, high value added businesses, what kind of change do you think you need in terms of, especially in the leadership?
I think it obviously starts with a cultural change, right? We talk a lot about changing strategies. And it is fundamental that you develop a strategy.
Easy to say, but
exactly. The fact of the matter is the success of whether or not the strategy gets implemented properly will depend on the organizational culture and the receptivity to that change. And going from, let's say, from hardware to solutions does imply a change in focus, a change in what is important and how we sell to our customers. And so it is fundamental that we change the culture first before also trying to change the strategy.
I think my belief is that without any people's mobility among the companies and diversity and inclusion, it's very challenging to change the fixed mindset of the people.
Yeah, I think So there are two ways of this. One is you bring in people from outside to bring in new ideas and share, which is, again, going back to the topic of the MBA, I think one of the great benefits of an MBA is the ability to engage with people from all over the world.
Yeah.
You know, we have, I think, this year we have 44 nationalities and 100 students, right? So being exposed to people with other ideas, other backgrounds is fundamental in order to do that. But I think it's also, you know, the leadership at the top, you know, leading by example, by role model. If people don't see that at the top, they're not going to embody it themselves.
Yeah,
so it really does start there.
Tone setting from the top.
Exactly.
I see. Okay. And the other kind of a force of transformation or change is stakeholders, shareholders.
Yes.
So there are, even Japan, there are some activists becoming more active, actually.
Yeah.
Is the same thing happening in Europe too?
I think, you know, active shareholders can have different roles. I mean, you look in Europe, and in some cases, I would say the activism is to preserve profitability, to push the firms in certain ways. Sometimes the activism is also to assume certain responsibilities. You know, you have certain corporations which have adopted more of a sustainability focus, partly through pressure from external stakeholders.
Right.
So when we think about stakeholders, there are the shareholders, obviously, which are fundamental, or the primary stakeholders, but you also have external interests. And so it becomes a balancing act between managing those different stakeholders.
I see. Interesting. Okay, so since you are specialized in leadership, there are various kinds of leadership style. And what is the most updated management style, leadership style you are looking for?
I would say, you know, what we try not to do at IMD is to dictate that there's only one style. The reality is you need to be true to who you are as a leader. And that will vary individual by individual, country by country. And so it is always a challenge to say, okay, there's one style of leadership which needs to be applied in the US, as well as in Japan, as well as in Europe.
Depends.
It depends.
In the stage of the companies.
The stage of the company, the context. You know, certain people, workforces, countries will respond differently to different styles of leadership. I do think the key element of role modeling is fundamental across the board. And so I think that element is fundamental. But, you know, at IMD, we always say we help develop leaders. I never use the word teach leadership because teaching is, yes, I can show different models, but developing is bringing out what's inside the individual to make them the best at what they can be.
But people wouldn't accept dictatorship management anymore.
I think it's something which, you know, is no longer, I think, anywhere accepted. That isn't to say it doesn't sometimes happen in certain places, but the fact of the matter is, you know, hopefully we're past that stage of management.
I see. But if you're a startup, sometimes you have to be very aggressive, sacrificing your personal life. And
it's you know, startup is a tough world. It's I think the reason people will engage and develop their own companies is because they have a passion for something, and that passion is what gets them through the potentially, you know, tough times financially as well as personally. But they're doing it for themselves. I think it's different if somebody is having to do all that for somebody else. It can be a tougher sell. I think with entrepreneurism, people will work extremely hard because it is their passion, right, and their body. And again, it goes back to when you do have that at a corporation, and when you're asking people to put in the effort, that leadership from the top is what will inspire them to do it. If they're not inspired at the top, they're not going to put in that effort.
All right. So I want to ask you here a little bit of personal question. Sure. You learn at the university, and once you got into private sector, which is McKinsey consultants, right?
Yes.
And then you kind of went back to MIT Sloan School and get a PhD, and then went through academia career. Do you have any eventual kind of a purpose, your life purpose?
Yeah, I think academia has always been sort of where I wanted to be. It might be hard, strange sounding, but when I went to McKinsey, it was partly because I was finishing university. At the same time, I was working at the White House as a researcher because I was going to school in Washington, D.C. And one of my colleagues at the White House, she was on leave from McKinsey, and she provided me. She said, "You should look into this firm." I had no idea who McKinsey was at the time because there was no internet. I wasn't per se in a business school. I was in a school of foreign service.
Was it a good experience?
And it was amazing. It was, so she recommended, said, apply to these people. And I was like, okay. I had already applied to do a PhD and was accepted. Okay. But then I talked to McKinsey. I thought this sounds like an exciting opportunity. And so I went with them. And I worked in New York for 2 years, and it actually did influence where I decided to put my efforts. Originally, I was going to become a professor of finance, and I ended up switching as a result of McKinsey, going into strategic management and leadership. And so I went to MIT, did my PhD, and then continued on the path towards academia after that. Academia has this draw for me of two things. One is your ability to really know a topic in depth and to solve problems, get to the answers. And then secondly is the ability to help others fulfill their potential and mentorship. And to be honest, the longer I go in my career, the more important that second element is, which I think is why I also have been drawn to running programs, designing programs to really help develop leaders.
Human factor is involved, and also the agenda has been changing, right? Or is always changing depending on the situation in the field of strategy and leadership.
Completely. I mean, I love the element of designing educational experiences because they constantly, topics change, focuses change, and therefore it's not as though I'm just teaching the same thing I was teaching 10, 15 years ago. You're always having to update.
So in teaching business strategy and leadership, you want to be on top of what is going on in the real world, right?
Exactly.
So if you are closed and always stay in the academia, you'll be easily disconnected.
For sure.
So what kind of things are you doing?
So I think the wonderful thing about where I am now at IMD is it's an institute which is constantly engaged with the real business world. We have 100 MBA students, but we have between 8,000 and 10,000 executives that we teach every year. And so even myself, who I spend today most of my time with the MBAs, the fact of the matter is I'm also teaching corporate programs, both for corporations as well as for governments. And what's great is that we will have professors who maybe in the morning they're teaching a program to a German multinational, and then in the afternoon they're teaching our MBA students. And so they are sort of the conduits between the real world experiences and challenges. In some senses, they get a preview of what are the big challenges corporations are facing and can bring that straight into the classroom. It's a unique thing, I think, of IMD that we do both of these. Most academic institutions, the faculty only teach the degree programs. And there I do agree. It can be a challenge that, what we're studying was maybe important 3-4 years ago as opposed to yesterday. And so luckily we have that
Yeah,
benefit.
in a sense it's a tough show. You have to update yourself always.
You do, constantly.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, so last ask is to, do you mind doing some PR to our potential applicants?
No, definitely. Like I say, an MBA for me can be a life-changing event. It is an opportunity to not only enhance your education, particularly if you're coming from a background which is maybe not business focused, maybe it's more technical, maybe it's engineering, maybe it's sciences, but you want to complement those capabilities with the managerial skills that one needs to go up in an organization. And so an MBA, I think, provides that to students. It also is an amazing opportunity to engage and be exposed to ideas from all over the world. Aside from getting, like I say, the technical skills of finance, accounting, and so forth, you will also be exposed to a whole host of individuals with different beliefs, different advantages. You will have the opportunity to be in groups where one person might be a doctor from Nigeria, the other person is an artist from Australia, the third person is a consultant from New York, and the fourth one is an engineer from Germany.
Quite diverse.
And so very diverse in terms of industry as well as national backgrounds, and it provides an amazing venue to develop your team working skills, your cooperation skills, and also open your eyes to what might be considered the norm in other parts of the country, or other parts of the world. So I think it's an amazing opportunity to acquire skills, also to have just an amazing life experience.
Great. Thank you, Omar.
Thank you so much. It's been a privilege.
It was great honor to have you on this program.
Thank you
so
much. My pleasure.